Welcome back to our exploration of the world's most perplexing mysteries. I'm your host, and today we're traveling to the remote and windswept Flannan Isles off the coast of Scotland to investigate one of maritime history's most baffling disappearances. Picture this. It's December 15th, 1900, and the steamship Arctur is making its way across the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic when the captain notices something deeply troubling. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse, a crucial beacon for ships navigating these dangerous waters, is completely dark. For 3 days, passing vessels have reported the same thing: no light where there should be a powerful beam cutting through the Scottish winter darkness. What they would discover when a relief boat finally reached the lighthouse would become one of the most enduring mysteries in maritime history: the complete disappearance of 3 experienced lighthouse keepers without a trace.
In Scotland's Outer Hebrides, these islands have a dark reputation among sailors. They're surrounded by treacherous currents, unpredictable weather, and jagged rocks that have claimed countless ships over the centuries. The lighthouse itself was a relatively new structure, having been completed just 1 year earlier in 1899. It stood 75 feet tall and was considered a marvel of engineering, designed to withstand the most brutal Atlantic storms. The lighthouse was staffed by a rotation of 4 keepers, with 3 always on duty while the 4th remained on shore leave. On December 15th, the 3 men stationed at the lighthouse were Thomas Marshall, the principal keeper with over 20 years of experience, James Duckett, an assistant keeper known for his reliability and calm demeanor, and Donald MacArthur, the youngest of the 3, but still an experienced lighthouse keeper with several years of service.
When the relief vessel Hesperus finally reached the Flannan Isles on December 26, 1900, the scene that greeted the crew was deeply unsettling. Captain Jim Harvey and his men found the lighthouse in perfect working order. The lens was clean, the oil reservoirs were full, and all equipment was functioning normally. However, there was no sign of the 3 keepers anywhere on the island. The most disturbing discovery was made inside the lighthouse living quarters. On the kitchen table sat a half-eaten meal, plates of food that had been abandoned mid-bite, as if the men had suddenly stood up and walked away. A chair was overturned, suggesting some kind of sudden disturbance or urgency. Most puzzling of all, hanging on a peg near the door was a set of oilskins, the waterproof coat that no experienced lighthouse keeper would venture outside with in rough weather. The logbook entries showed that everything had been normal up until December 13th, with routine weather observations and maintenance notes. Then, abruptly, the entries stopped.
The official investigation was led by Robert Muirhead, a superintendent from the Northern Lighthouse Board, who arrived on the island just days after the discovery. His findings painted a picture of men who had vanished in the midst of their daily routine. The lighthouse lamp had been cleaned and prepared for lighting, suggesting the keepers had been going about their normal duties when whatever happened occurred. All the clocks in the lighthouse had stopped, though at different times, adding another layer of mystery to the scene. Muirhead noted that the island's landing platform showed signs of severe storm damage. Iron railings had been bent and twisted, and a large block of stone weighing over a ton had been displaced from its position. However, weather records from nearby stations showed that while there had been rough seas, there was no storm severe enough on December 13th or 14th to cause such damage. This discrepancy would become central to the mystery. If there was no major storm, what had caused the damage? And why would the keepers have ventured outside? The official conclusion reached by the Northern Lighthouse Board was that the 3 men had been swept away by what they termed an extra-large sea, essentially a rogue wave of extraordinary size that had caught the keepers while they were attempting to secure equipment near the island's landing area. According to this theory, the men had gone outside to check on storm damage or secure loose equipment when they were overwhelmed by a massive wave. The overturned chair was explained as evidence of someone rushing to help his colleagues, and the missing oilskins suggested that at least one keeper had gone outside without proper protection, possibly in an emergency. However, this official explanation raised more questions than it answered. Why would experienced lighthouse keepers venture out in dangerous conditions? Why was there no distress signal sent? Most importantly, why did the weather records not support the existence of a storm large enough to generate such a wave? The lighthouse was positioned 150 feet above sea level. For a wave to reach that height and sweep away 3 men would require a storm of almost unprecedented magnitude. Alternative theories began to emerge almost immediately, with some focusing on the possibility of foul play or accident among the keepers themselves. One theory suggested that the men had gotten into a violent argument that escalated into murder, with the survivor then taking his own life by jumping into the sea. Proponents of this theory pointed to the overturned chair as evidence of a struggle, and noted that lighthouse keepers, isolated for months at a time, were known to suffer from cabin fever and psychological stress. However, this theory was undermined by the fact that all 3 men were described as experienced, level-headed individuals with no history of violence or mental instability. Thomas Marshall, in particular, was known for his calm leadership and had successfully managed lighthouse crews for decades. Additionally, there were no signs of violence in the living quarters, no blood, no damaged furniture, beyond the single overturned chair, and no indication of a struggle. The theory also failed to explain why a survivor would choose suicide over simply reporting an accident or self-defense. More exotic theories began to circulate, particularly among the superstitious fishing communities of the Scottish Highlands. Local folklore had long held that the Flannan Isles were haunted or cursed. The islands were sometimes called the Islands of the Dead, and were associated with supernatural phenomena. Some claimed that the keepers had been taken by sea spirits or other supernatural entities that were angered by the presence of the lighthouse on their sacred ground. These theories were fueled by reports from other lighthouse keepers and sailors who claimed to have seen strange lights, heard unexplained sounds, or witnessed other paranormal activity around the Flannan Isles. One particularly persistent legend claimed that the islands were a gateway to the other world and that the keepers had been pulled through to another dimension. While these supernatural explanations were dismissed by official investigators, they reflected the deep unease that the mystery had created in the local maritime community. In the decades following the disappearance, several new pieces of evidence and witness accounts emerged that added complexity to the mystery. In the 1920s, a retired sea captain came forward claiming that he had seen a small boat near the Flannan Isles on December 15, 1900, 2 days after the keepers were last seen alive. According to his account, the boat appeared to be in distress and was being battered by rough seas. He claimed to have seen figures in the boat, but was unable to render assistance due to the dangerous conditions. This testimony suggested that the keepers might have survived the initial incident and attempted to escape the island, only to perish at sea. However, critics pointed out that the captain had waited over 20 years to report this sighting and questioned why he hadn't mentioned it during the original investigation. Additionally, no wreckage from a lighthouse boat was ever found, despite extensive searches of the surrounding waters.
Modern scientific analysis has brought new tools to bear on the Flannan Isles mystery, but has failed to provide definitive answers. Oceanographic studies have confirmed that the waters around the Flannan Isles are capable of generating rogue waves of extraordinary size, particularly when Atlantic swells interact with the complex underwater topography around the islands. Computer modeling has shown that, under certain conditions, waves could theoretically reach heights sufficient to sweep the lighthouse platform. However, these studies also confirm that such waves would require weather conditions far more severe than what was recorded on December 13th through 15th, 1900. Geological surveys of the island have revealed evidence of previous storm damage dating back centuries, suggesting that the Flannan Isles have indeed been struck by massive waves in the past.
Some researchers have proposed that the keepers might have been victims of a sneaker wave, a single, unexpectedly large wave that can occur even in relatively calm conditions.
Psychological analysis of the case has focused on the possibility that the keepers suffered from a collective psychological break, or mass hysteria. Isolation, harsh weather conditions, and the constant stress of maintaining a lighthouse in one of the most dangerous locations in the North Atlantic could potentially have led to irrational behavior. Some psychologists have suggested that the men might have experienced a shared delusion or panic that caused them to abandon the lighthouse and attempt to escape by sea. This theory would explain why they left behind essential equipment like oilskins, and why there was no distress signal sent. However, critics argue that all three men were experienced professionals who had successfully handled isolation and stress before. Additionally, the lighthouse logbook showed no signs of deteriorating mental state in the days leading up to the disappearance. The entries were routine and professional, right up until they stopped.
Tell a thrilling story. Recent investigations have also explored the possibility of a cover-up or conspiracy involving the Northern Lighthouse Board or other maritime authorities. Some researchers have suggested that the official investigation was rushed and incomplete, possibly to avoid liability or embarrassment. They point to inconsistencies in the official reports, missing documentation, and the fact that some potential witnesses were never interviewed. One theory proposes that the lighthouse keepers discovered something they weren't supposed to see, perhaps smuggling operations, military activities, or other clandestine operations in the area. According to this theory, the men were murdered to keep them silent, and their bodies were disposed of at sea. However, no evidence has ever been found to support these conspiracy theories, and they require assuming a level of coordination and secrecy that seems unlikely given the remote location and the number of people who would have needed to be involved.
The Flannan Isles lighthouse mystery has had a lasting impact on maritime safety and lighthouse operations. Following the disappearance, the Northern Lighthouse Board implemented new safety protocols, including mandatory buddy systems for outdoor work, improved communication procedures, and more frequent relief rotations to reduce the psychological stress of isolation. The mystery also led to advances in lighthouse automation technology, as authorities sought to reduce the number of personnel required at remote stations. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse itself was eventually automated in 1971, ending the era of manned lighthouse keeping at this dangerous location. The case has also become a touchstone for discussions about maritime safety, the psychological effects of isolation, and the limits of human knowledge in the face of the ocean's power. It remains one of the most studied disappearances in maritime history, with new theories and investigations emerging regularly.